Picture a classic scene from any movie or TV show about old school advertising. A group of ad execs sitting around a conference table, empty pizza boxes stacked high. If it's Mad Men, ashtrays spilling over. If it's anything past Mad Men, maybe a growing pile of Red Bull cans. There's a whiteboard, and the best and brightest minds at the firm are trying to come up with the perfect pitch. The one that's going to land the white whale, the ultimate client. Well, my friends, this is the very scene I found myself in a few years ago with my team at Intellityx. We provided RFID wristbands and the tech platform that powered major music festivals like Coachella, Tomorrowland, and Lollapalooza. And we'd spotted a new growth opportunity in the esports industry. Live esports tournaments were getting bigger and bigger and attracting tens of thousands of people to their tournaments. And we thought our tech could help. We'd just signed the International, one of the biggest tournaments in the space, and we're eager to keep that momentum going. So I locked the team in a conference room, ordered the pizza, and passed out the Red Bull. What's our messaging going to be? How do we attract the next big client? What can we do to position ourselves properly? We kept brainstorming and whiteboarding, and hours passed by. And honestly, it felt like we weren't getting very far. Until one of my extremely bright interns piped up and said, "Why don't we just ask the first tournament why they decided to work with us in the first place?" And it was like, duh, of course that's the answer. Why on earth are we locking ourselves in this room, literally shutting ourselves off from the outside world and the one customer that we actually have? Of course we're not going to come up with the answer that way. So we literally called them and asked, "Why did you choose to work with us?" What they said changed everything. "You're a platform that allows us to continuously enhance the customer experience year after year." And when we pushed a little deeper, why did that actually matter to them? It came down to the data and sponsorship dollars. The fan experience was the product, but the data we captured let them prove value to their sponsors, which turned our platform from a cost center to a revenue generator. That changed everything for us. We weren't just selling tech to events. We were selling a way for them to make more money and improve the guest experience. And once we understood that, we knew exactly who else to go after and what the pitch should be. Not every esport tournament was a fit, but the ones with real sponsor relationships, who were hungry for data and wanted to prove ROI, those were our people. I don't know why so many of us default to this, but there's an assumption that we're supposed to figure everything out on our own. But in sales, that instinct can be dangerous because your best customers are often your best teachers. Yes, there's a place for internal work, reviewing the numbers, analyzing trends, and forecasting. But there's also enormous value in getting outside of the conference room and talking to the people who already chose to work with you. So this week, we're talking about the customer and why understanding who they are, what they need, and why they're a great fit for what you're selling is fundamental to sales success. Because who you choose to sell to and how well you understand them might be the most important decision a company can make. I'm Eric Jansen, an entrepreneur turned sales professor, and I have a simple mission: to change the way people think about sales. Because sales is a life skill, and this is Sales Reframed, a podcast brought to you in partnership with Ivy Executive Education. In software development, there's a concept called technical debt. It's the future cost of shipping imperfect code, the difficulty of building good code on top of bad code. I recently co-wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review that applies this same concept to sales. Sales debt is what accumulates when you sell to customers who aren't a great fit, chasing short-term revenue at the expense of long-term growth. These poor fit customers churn faster and pull your product team in directions that don't serve your best customers. Now, some sales debt is inevitable. In the early days, you don't know exactly who your ideal customer is, so you cast a really wide net and just learn as you go. That's actually healthy. But at some point, you have to step back and ask, are the customers we're working with the kind that we should be building the future of this company around? That's the shift from exploration to intention. And it's why understanding your customer, really understanding them, is so fundamental. Because most companies I see don't starve from a lack of opportunity, they drown from a lack of focus. So today we're talking about knowing your customer. Let's get into it. If you want to know what drives the Savannah Bananas, You don't have to look much further than the name of their parent company, Fans First Entertainment.
We just started very clearly with our mission. With the company's name being Fans First, our mission is Fans First, Entertain Always. So we are either putting the fan first and taking care of them in some capacity, or we are entertaining them. Those are our parameters.
That's Emily Cole, one of the co-founders of Fans First, and one half of the couple that's created the sports phenomena known as Banana Ball.
We found that baseball was long and slow and boring for those of us who already worked in the industry, and my husband who played. And he's like, if I'm bored, how are these people sitting in the stands for 4 hours? We created Banana Ball to make baseball fun. And that's what we are. We're a very fast paced, entertaining sport. A lot of trick plays, a lot of acrobatics, but it is still at its root a very competitive game between two teams.
If you've never seen Banana Ball being played, imagine baseball with the amped up theatrics of the Harlem Globetrotters or pro wrestling, but without the scripted outcomes. There are antics, dance routines, fan participation, all of it. But the games are competitive, and both teams are really trying to win. These days, the Bananas highlights are shown on SportsCenter, and they have more followers on TikTok than the official Major League Baseball account, and waitlists for tickets is around 1 million people long. But back in 2016, the Bananas were a new team in a regional summer league that you've probably never heard of. Emily and her husband, Jesse Cole, met in 2010 working for a different minor league team. They fell in love and eventually settled in Savannah, Georgia. The city's minor league team had moved to South Carolina, and that left an empty stadium looking for a team. Enter Emily and Jesse.
Here we are, outsiders. We're young at the time. We're in our mid-20s. Nobody's taking us seriously. We sold like 2 season tickets. Nobody was buying tickets. Everyone thought we were a joke. We honestly received hate mail once we named the team the Bananas. But that was the turning point for us, was how do we convince them that we are different? And so we went all in on being different. We named the team the Savannah Bananas. We named our team after a fruit. We really wanted to go all in on this entertainment, fun, different community type feel.
Emily and Jesse's hope was that if the two of them, two people who lived and breathed baseball, were looking for something a little different, a game that was faster paced, less caught up in rules and tradition, and most of all, more fun to watch, then maybe they'd be able to find a few thousand like-minded folks in Savannah.
So we probably had our first game in May. Somehow, by some miracle, we were able to convince enough people to come to sell the game out, which was like 4,000 people at this time in our small stadium in Savannah, Georgia. But we sold enough tickets to fill the stadium. I honestly think most people bought the tickets because they thought they were going to come to a joke or a failure, or they were going to be there to be able to post about it later. But fortunately, the whole off season, we had been perfecting our craft. And the name of our company is Fans First Entertainment. We went all in on working on the show, working on how we were going to entertain, how we were going to take care of our fans when they showed up. And although it was a complete downpour that first night, and it could have been a horrible night, we had, I don't like the word trained because that's usually used towards animals, but we had gone through enough orientations with our people, and we had taught them enough and shared with them enough the passion and the vision that when it started raining, everybody went and grabbed umbrellas or tarps or something and walked people from their cars into the stadium. I mean, this had never been done before. There were players doing this before. Fans are out in the rain, in their car, coming to watch us, hopefully fall on our faces. And that first impression is that we let them into the stadium early by escorting them in because it was raining. So right off the bat, we started winning people over because of our heart and because of how much we cared about them and about this product. Then they get into the stadium, and although it's raining for 2 hours, we had planned to have a rain delay script. We said, okay, if there's no baseball, how can we entertain these people? How can we take care of them? So we have 2 or 3 hour rain delay script where our players are doing tarp slides, and our dance team, which are a bunch of grandmas, they're called the Banana Nanas. They went up on the dugouts and they danced during this time. And so even though people did not end up seeing one pitch thrown that night, the whole game ended up being canceled, people left entertained. And they left saying, okay, I kind of understand what this is about. Maybe I'll go see him again. I'm not saying they were won over right away, but we at least had 4,000 people who wanted to give us a chance and who were rooting for us.
So how did Emily and Jesse know what to do to bring in 4,000 fans on that very first night? They didn't have to guess because they were the customer. They were the baseball fans looking for something different. Remember what Emily said.
If I'm bored, how are these people sitting in the stands for 4 hours?
And that drive to do things differently, to always put the fans first, has led to some incredible success.
You've grown significantly, specifically over the last couple of years. Can you give us a frame of reference for size, scale? You're doing a world tour. Just like, how big is this thing now?
It's obviously much bigger than we ever anticipated. We started as a college summer wooden bat league team. And for those of you who are not familiar with baseball, that's a pretty low level of baseball. Okay. So we were having guys come who were, maybe playing Division I baseball, but they wanted to be seen by scouts during the summer. They wanted to kind of keep their reps up. So they would come play for us for the summer. And it was a league that didn't really matter. Okay. And now what it has turned into is its own sport. We actually left the league that we were in, which was an actual baseball league, and we created an entirely new identity of a new sport. So we do not play baseball anymore. We actually play banana ball. So we created new rules and have a new league and have our own teams. And now we travel all over. We call it the world because that's where we're anticipating. But right now we're still just across the country, across the United States. And yeah, we play all over from about February until October. The things that I was working on before I got on this call was our cruise. We've actually chartered a cruise ship. And so in October, we are taking 2,500 of our biggest fans who have bought cabins on this exclusive Bananaland at Sea cruise. So it is growing into things that we never anticipated, 9 years ago when we started.
It probably certainly wouldn't have anticipated in 2008 when you graduated and had no idea how this was going to play out, right?
Correct. I mean, that's the beauty of following your passions. And I didn't wake up when I was 12 and say, this is what I want to do. But you just take different opportunities that come and you get your hands dirty and you start interning or taking part-time jobs and finding out what you like. And here I am.
Sometimes to know the customer, you have to live in that world. But this isn't the only way. You don't have to be born and raised in an industry to become a savvy salesperson. Emily and Jesse were their ideal customer. But what if you're not? Sometimes the solution is to immerse yourself. And my next guests are a fantastic example of doing just that.
Yep. So my grandfather had a demolition company, great-grandfather had a steel company, and then Lauren's family, her grandfather as well, had a specialty trade contractor. So we both grew up at least knowing about the industry, and then Lauren had some on-site experience as well as the degree in civil engineering.
That's Mallory Brody. She and her co-founder Lauren Lake built Bridget, a workforce planning platform that helps construction companies put the right people on the right projects at the right time. Today, nearly 40% of the top contractors in North America use it. What's remarkable is that neither Mallory nor Lauren came from the construction or software industries. They learned about them from the ground up, one conversation at a time. Both had family who'd worked in the trades, and Lauren had a civil engineering degree that gave her some exposure to how job sites operated. But peripheral familiarity isn't the same as really knowing an industry. Here's Lauren.
Yeah, so I had spent a little bit of time on site, like literally just as a co-op student. And so I had just seen kind of how the site operated. I spent time working with different sites and just understanding that there was very little technology that was being used. So when Mallory and I started talking, that's kind of where the conversation started, was just around, isn't it odd that everybody has, a cell phone, smartphone with them at all times, yet everyone's using pen and paper on site? And it was really just quick Google searches at that point. We've realized we had this shared family background that was interesting. And we started calling all of the friends and family we could, just asking them what their experience in the industry was. So just trying to reach out to people we knew had some construction experience and asking them what they felt the challenges were. It got us on that path of kind of thinking about mobile technology and why it wasn't being used on the job site at that time. And so that's what led us to doing our true on-site research that lasted the next 6 months, where we just drove around to construction sites and talked to people and tried to get their perspective and their understanding, and realized that that really wasn't true. People on site really wanted to leverage technology. They just didn't feel like they had the tools that they needed.
What did you show up on site
with? Just talking? Did you
Donuts.
donuts? Okay, so you had
Coffee.
food. Okay, so how did that go?
So-
Like, what would your first meeting go like to get feedback on site for this idea?
Yeah, so we got back to the Western campus, and it was actually when the new Ivy building was under construction and just a block away from where Lauren was living at the time. So we basically walked on the site with coffee and donuts, and we said, hey, can we have 10 minutes of your time? We're students and we're doing research on a project. And they said, okay, sure, sounds good. We have five or 10 minutes for you. And we just started asking, what's challenging for you on site? What's frustrating? What takes too much time? What costs a lot of money? And that was sort of the first of many, many interviews that we did. And the Ivy building, we actually ended up shadowing them many, many mornings on site. So we would just come back and follow them around, watch what they were doing, look at kind of all the paperwork they had in their site office. And it was this site that was the first one that talked to us about the punch list management process or deficiency management. And that's kind of what prompted us to actually start designing the app and what it should look like and how it should work.
Cool. So they literally like just let you follow them around and watch them and see how they put information in their computers or not computers.
Yeah. And I think the reason they allowed us to keep coming back was because every time we came back, we had donuts and coffee, but we also had made progress. I think it builds confidence that we are serious about this.
So we ended up doing that over 500 times over those 6 months.
500 meetings?
500, yes.
Wow.
You heard that right. 500 meetings. But I think that points to a really smart decision that Mallory and Lauren made. Rather than trying to create an everything app that solved every problem and provided a one-stop solution for every possible job site under the sun, they drilled down on a few very specific, solvable problems that seemed to affect general contractors. And that guidance came from people on the ground, the actual end users of the thing they were building.
And so even now when we're thinking about product development and we're a 45-person company now, we don't have these debates in the boardroom about what we should build. We go out and we talk to the customers because they're ultimately the ones who can best describe what their pain points are. So when you're really about to actually invest in something, making sure that you're genuinely interested and curious about what your customers' pain points may be, as opposed to seeing it as this step that you just have to do to check off a box.
It wasn't from day one like we were doing these really focused surveys. It was very broad questions like what Mallory said, what's the biggest frustration in your day? And every interview would go a different direction. And it was challenging at that time to figure out what the focus point for us should be because there were endless opportunities we found within the construction industry. And so we had to be really careful that we weren't trying to go too wide too quickly. We knew that it was just the two of us. We had limited money at that time. So we really wanted to pick something super focused and do a good job of that before just trying to do everything.
Their next step was to get a working beta version of Bridget into the hands of their early adopters, with the hope that these early users would then become actual customers.
I think that's another reason why that the research is valuable is because it essentially becomes your sales pipeline when you actually launch the product. So all of a sudden you have 500 people that have been engaged in this process that could become your customer very quickly as opposed to starting just from scratch. So yeah, a bunch of them did become customers.
To date, Bridget has raised over $35 million in venture financing and touts a long list of top-tier customers. Not bad for two founders who showed up to construction sites with donuts and no industry experience. I think people sometimes get caught up in the idea that sales is about luck or vibes or intuition. Maybe it's all about who you know. And sure, that might help you get a foot in the door or land a first meeting. But once you're in the room, you have to actually know who you're selling to. You can't just vibe that out. So far, we've heard two startups use deep customer understanding to build successful businesses. But this isn't just a startup story. The same principle holds for big, more established players facing massive disruption. Take bookselling. Over the past 2 decades, the industry's been upended on every level: how books are sold, how they're distributed, and how they're read. Most legacy players didn't survive the shift, but a few managed to navigate it and come out stronger. One of them, the Canadian chain Indigo, and its e-reader spinoff, Rakuten Kobo.
2006, 2007, you see a bunch of different e-readers show up. There was a company called E-Ink that had figured out how to make these low-power, non-reflective screens that were kind of getting closer to what paper would look like as opposed to an OLED screen or an LCD screen. And a bunch of companies jumped on that early and started making what would become the e-reader industry.
That's Michael Tamblyn. He's the president and CEO of Rakuten Kobo and has been with the company since day one in 2009. Before that, he was the founding CEO of the supply chain agency BookNet Canada and co-founder of Canada's first online bookstore, bookshelf.ca, which later became indigo.ca. Oh, and not to brag, but he's also a Western grad.
Sony was one of the first ones. Amazon came in, pretty quickly after that as well. So we're looking at sort of 2006, 2007, 2008. And it was around that time that my old friends at Indigo were getting together around a table and starting to have a strategic conversation about what would happen if ebooks started to displace print books. We were in the course of seeing the disruption in the video and DVD industry. You could argue about the nature and the shape of that disruption, but the one thing that was absolutely clear was that the biggest casualties were the retailers, the people that had that endpoint connection with the customer. And that was a situation that Indigo was taking really seriously. Disruption is coming. Are we going to disrupt ourselves, or are we going to let somebody else do it to us? And to their credit, they were like, yes, let's do it to ourselves. And they hired a bunch of people to start working in the Indigo basement on what it would mean to have an ebook offering connected to a bookstore.
To get a sense of the position they were in, an e-reader company actually has 3 different sets of customers, all with varying needs that have to be met: publishers, bookstores, and readers. And to survive, Kobo would need to present a winning pitch to all 3 of them. I'll let Michael explain it.
When we started in the ebook business, there must have been like 50, 60 startups that were all working around in this space. And now there's us, a couple of others that are more regional players, and then the biggest e-commerce company in the world, the most profitable hardware manufacturer in the world, and the biggest search and ad platform in the world. In each of those 3 cases, they have privileged access to a base of customers that they get to pull on. So if you're Amazon, you get to take all of the book customers that you've amassed around the world, you get to introduce them to ebooks, and you get to move some of them to digital. Like, that's your customer funnel. If you are Apple, you're going to sell 1 billion phones, and you're going to put an ebook app on all of them that's Google Books, and some number of people are going to bump into that and become ebook customers for you. Same with Google. You're going to have the Google Play Store. It's going to show up on like 5 billion Android phones. Some number of people are going to bump into that and start using it. And the one thing that none of those 3 big companies could do was create a win-win partnership with a book retailer who already had great relationships with a lot of the book consumers in a particular country. And so going to that place where our competitors couldn't go, finding a value proposition that was going to help accelerate our business, but also solve a major strategic dilemma for them, ended up kind of being the only viable solution to the challenge of how else can you be a global ebook platform that doesn't involve being, one of the big 3 tech platforms. In the beginning, I was working, how do we get publishers to give us ebooks? What does our content catalog look like? Can we get the rights to sell these books all over the world? And then also the e-commerce part. How are we going to sell them? How are we going to price them? What's our promotional strategy look like? And we had a couple of foundational ideas when we were starting up the company. And one of them was that the ebook market wasn't going to be like the physical book market. And in physical books, you have a biggest bookstore in Canada, and you have a biggest bookstore in France, and you have a biggest bookstore in the UK. And we could already see from the complexity of the solution and the amount of investment that was involved that there wasn't going to be one of these for every country. There was going to be a few of them, and they were going to span the world. And we thought that we had a pretty good chance at being one of them.
As a salesperson, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. So now I'm hearing you're in these early meetings with publishers trying to, I don't love using the word convince as a salesperson, because I don't think you're trying to convince them to do something that they don't want to do, but you've got to somehow show them that there's this change happening, that you see the world a certain way, and then bring them on board with you. Take us to those earliest pitch meetings, whether it's a new market that you had to expand to, or even the publishers in Canada.
Again, like conversations that had to happen in a couple of different directions. We had to get the publishers on board, and that was, in some cases, deeply challenging because it wasn't just that publishers were seeing this as a format shift. Yeah, there's a lot of emotion around the physical format of the book in a way that I think there wasn't with music, for example. Like, there was, people have strong attachment to vinyl, but they made that shift to CDs. This, digital might be another format shift. That wasn't the part they were worried about. What they were worried about was piracy and the change in distribution. And like, those are the things that they were worried about. And by the time we got to book publishers, they had seen the music industry completely be turned upside down. They had seen video in the process of being disrupted and reimagined. And the combination of conservatism about the format on one side and, full-on fear of disruption on the other was really strong. The good thing about all of that was that a lot of the fear was directed in a particular way. Publishers were worried about Amazon. They were worried about a single company dominating this format. They'd gotten out with Kindle early. They were doing a lot of very aggressive repricing of books and ebooks. They were selling books that were selling in hardcover for $25, $27, $30 for $9.99. They were losing money on every book. And it was very clearly a push to secure as much of the market share in this space as they could before other companies could get started. So in some ways, the fear of one company dominating the space was a huge advantage for us because what they were looking for was competition. They wanted other people to come in and create a more diverse market. And fear is a powerful motivator to make change. In some ways, easier than trying to frame the opportunity. Our bias always is that we overestimate our ability to accurately forecast risk, and we underestimate, we're not as good at figuring out what opportunity actually looks like. So if we're trying to get somebody to move and to try something new, getting them to understand the risk of not doing it is some ways a lot easier. And that was certainly the case for us. You want to work with Kobo because you need somebody else in here that initially wasn't Amazon, and then later also wasn't Apple and wasn't Google. You want somebody who actually cares about this segment as an industry for its own sake. That ended up being very powerful.
So publishers want to see more competition, but retailers, that might be a substantially harder pitch. It's a group of folks who would most likely, initially at least, see them as a direct threat.
The other set of conversations we had to have, though, was with other retailers. We had figured out fairly early on that the strategic dilemma that Indigo was facing was a replicable one. They were trying to answer the question, how do we as a national book chain solve the question of how to sell ebooks? There are a lot of national book chains. So that became a model that we could take and walk from country to country and find that number one or number two retailer in a territory who was absolutely facing that same strategic dilemma that Indigo was. And if it wasn't coming at them right now in front of them, they could see that it was only a few years away. We were able to say, hey, there's a way that you can meet this moment and we can help you do it. And not only can we help you do it, we've already helped other people do it. And they're retailers that and they're in the same industry that you're in, and you can talk to them and you can find out that it's going to be okay. And our job is going to be to make sure that you're as competitive as possible in the face of this challenge that's coming at you. And that ended up being a really compelling proposition as well.
Part of the job that we're trying to do here with the podcast is to reframe the way that people think about selling, because we have this idea that it's a salesperson versus a buyer, that you're trying to convince them to do something, that there's magic words that I can say that are going to get them to close, in the very end. It's not at all the type of selling that we're talking about on the podcast. This is a great example because there's this change happening in the world. We see a path to be able to help you. Let's get aligned in solving this problem together as partners. That feels like a perfect example of the type of selling that we want to teach.
We both needed something. So it wasn't just a case of, I've got this product and I want you to buy it. What we had figured out was that the most valuable customers that we were looking for were already attached to bookstores. They already had a relationship with someone. It was going to be very expensive for us to introduce ourselves to book consumers in different countries and convince them that we were a good place to go to all by ourselves. At one point, we had an estimate that for the US, for example, it was going to cost about $20 million worth of marketing for each each percentage of market share that we wanted to acquire there. So a 10-point share, $200 million worth of marketing. And 10 points, it's not a lot. So we needed another way to find customers. The way that we came to was, if we can create these partnerships with book retailers, we have what they want. They want a compelling solution to the ebook problem. They want to be absolutely a peer competitor to companies like Amazon that are coming into their space and actively want to try and take their customers. And instead, we can work together. We can create a great solution. Customers are going to be happy, and you're going to be able to keep that relationship with them over time rather than having them scooped up and taken to another e-commerce ecosystem somewhere else. And that ended up being a really compelling model.
Okay, so publishers, check. Retailers, also check. The last piece of the puzzle was making a compelling pitch to end users, the readers themselves. The starting point is obvious: portability, the appeal of new technology. But it took a few stumbles before Kobo really began to understand their customers. It actually took a few years for them to reassess not only how they were selling, but also to who.
No, it wasn't until probably almost 4 or 5 years in that we start getting disciplined about understanding who this customer is, why have they come to us, what are the different kinds of customer problems that we're solving, and how can we look at those in a more deliberate way in order to get a sense of where we should be going next. The first kind of glimmer of this for me, where maybe we're not where we think we are. Because when you start a company, you kind of build products for yourself in a lot of ways. The easiest person to ask about what should we do next is you. You're right there all the time. And so, you had a whole bunch of people in their 20s and 30s. And so you're really building products that resonate really well for people in their 20s and 30s. And it took a while for us to say, okay, well, that's us, but who's out there actually using this? And one of the first times that penny dropped for me was I got a phone call from a customer. And there was kind of a period where I had customer service reporting up to me. We had messed up a charge on a customer's credit card, and they were angry and they wanted someone to talk to. And like a salmon swimming upstream, this man had escalated from manager to manager to manager until he finally got to me. And after he finished giving me a piece of his mind, which was totally fair, after that we get to talking. And this is clearly an older adult, and so I'm asking him about who he is and how he got to Kobo. And he was 80 years old, and he had just started reading again. He had been a lifelong reader and had loved books all his life, and then had stopped reading at 70 years old. Had macular degeneration, very common things that happen to people as we age, to the point where even large print books weren't big enough for him to be able to read anymore. So for 10 years, he had not been able to do the thing that he loved the most, which was reading books. And then at 80, his 60-year-old son had given him an e-reader. And finally, he had a thing where he could make the print the size that it wanted to be so he could start reading again. So he was back reading in his 80s after a 10-year hiatus. The data points that jump out as I'm having this conversation: A, we have 80-year-old customers, and probably more than one. Second, they're being equipped by their 60-year-old children. And that people are using ebooks not just for the sake of their portability or because they're interested in technology. They're using them as a way to overcome a reading barrier. They're actively using them to solve a problem in their reading life. It was kind of from that conversation that we started to dig into the data. And that's when we found, for example, that we have more people between 55 and 75 in Canada than we have people 18 to 35. And that's pretty true, not just in Canada, but through a lot of Western Europe as well. We have far more women than we have men. Once you have that information in hand, you start to think very differently about how do you build product? How do you approach the whole idea of accessibility? What are you doing with customer service? How are you working with industrial design? You start to find out things that I didn't know before, like your skin gets drier as you get older, and touchscreens are based on the ability of your skin to create a capacitive charge that allows the screen to know that you've touched it. If your skin is drier, it doesn't get that charge. And so that's where having things like page turn buttons on an e-reader becomes really valuable if you're somebody whose skin maybe doesn't register screen touches as effectively as it could. All of these different things start to fall into place. And it's not to say that that's the only customer that we're focused on. And especially now, we have this whole new influx of people between 16 and 29 that are getting e-readers for the first time after the company's been running for 15 years, which is amazing. But it does mean that we have this core of customers who have tons of disposable income and have lots of time. And the combination of those two things plus a desire to read makes them our most valuable customers. So we'd better have them top of mind in everything from how we design a product to how we market it to how we, where we put it inside a store so people can find it.
There's lots of gems here, Michael. That gem is incredible. There's a concept I've been honing with a couple co-authors for about a year that we're calling sales debt. And similar to technical debt, it's like in the beginning, it's actually good. That's what you should do. You should work with a bunch of random people. And then at some point, let's say, hey, pause for a second. Who actually are the best ones for us? Who's using it the most? What metrics matter to us? And how would we stack rank the ones that are using it today? Actually, this group. Maybe we should think about coming up with some strategies to target that group specifically and cater to them. It sounds like exactly what your team did. That's amazing.
And I think it's important to point out that was met with resistance. It wasn't like everybody just looked at the output and went, amazing. Okay, now we know who this valuable customer is. We found out like just how much kind of general low-level ageism is embedded in our company as it is throughout the tech sector. There are a bunch of people who don't love working with old people, who don't think it's cool or don't think it's interesting or don't think that that's how they're going to make their career as a marketer or don't want those to be the things that they have to keep in mind when they're doing product design. We now have to, when we bring new people into the company, one of the things we talk about is like, let's be really clear about who the demographics are in our business. You are not working for yourself. You're not working for your friends. Think about your mom. If you think of no other person when you're making everything that you do, from an email to an ad, make sure that one of the people that you're thinking about is your mom, because that's the customer that is powering this business. But we're really clear that this is a customer who is incredibly valuable, is, when you get them, is amazingly loyal, and the demographics are on our side. Like, this segment is only getting bigger all the way through, G7 markets, and figuring out how to build market product for that customer, while at the same time bringing in new users in 15, 16 to 29 segment. Incredibly important skill, and one that most tech companies are really bad at. So it's, you can make a career figuring that out.
Rakuten Kobo has gone toe-to-toe with Amazon, Apple, and Google, and not just survived, but thrived. How? By understanding all three of their customers deeply. The publishers who feared Amazon's dominance, the retailers facing an existential threat, and readers who wanted something the tech giants weren't offering. And that last group turned out to be the real unlock. Remember, Kobo assumed they were building for young, tech-forward readers. It took years and a direct conversation with an 80-year-old customer to realize their most valuable audience was people using e-readers to overcome reading barriers. Once they understood that, everything changed. Product design, marketing, customer service, even how they thought about accessibility. That's what happens when you really know your customer. Most companies don't starve from lack of opportunity. They drown from lack of focus. The one thing from this episode, focus starts with really knowing your customer. The Bananas knew their customer because they were the customer. Baseball fans hungry for something different. Bridget learned about theirs through over 500 conversations over donuts and coffee. Kobo discovered theirs when an 80-year-old reader called to complain, and that conversation changed how they thought about everything. Here's what this means for you in sales. When you truly understand your customer, everything gets easier. You know who to pursue and who to walk away from. You know what to say and why it matters. You stop wasting time convincing people who are never going to buy and start spending it with the people who've been waiting for exactly what you're offering. The Bananas, Bridget, Kobo. 3 very different businesses, the same lesson. Know your customer, then go sell. Next time on Sales Reframed, you've identified the right customer. Now you have to show them why you're the right fit. Data and logic will only get you so far. To really grab someone's attention, you need an emotional connection. And the best way to do that is through story.
Most people, when they're pitching their businesses, they rely on facts. We should do the exact opposite. Not divorced from facts, but tell stories.
We've got award-winning sales professor Craig Wortman from Northwestern's Kellogg School, the incredible Eric Silverberg and Eli Gladstone from Speaker Labs, and Cynthia Keyshawn from Dayforce to unpack what makes a great story and how to use one to sell. This has been Sales Reframed. I'm Eric Jansen. Thanks for listening. A huge thanks to my guests this week, Emily Cole, co-founder of the Savannah Bananas, Lauren Lake and Mallory Brody from Bridget, and Michael Tamblin, CEO of Rakuten Kobo.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Ivy Executive Education, part of the Ivy Business School, consistently ranked among the top business schools globally. Ivy Executive Education delivers high-impact learning experiences for organizations and leaders at all levels. From custom design programs to coaching and open enrollment courses, Ivy works with executives and business operators around the world to drive real results. Their mission, like ours, is to turn cutting-edge research into practical insights that help people learn, grow, and succeed in a changing world. This show takes a village. I'd like to thank our executive producer, Sean Ackland Grant, and our editorial advisor, James Greenhill. Our audio engineer and producer is Carol Eugene Park, and our narrative producer is Michael Catano. Thanks also to our creative directors, Christina Ball and Michelle Stanescu. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.